I grew up in a family that could have been ripped straight from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. My parents, Mark and Elaine, were the kind of couple who always looked perfectly put together, Dad in his tailored suits, Mom in her immaculately pressed dresses. They had a way of making our lives seem effortless, as if happiness was a guarantee, not something you had to work for. We lived in a picturesque suburban home, the kind with a manicured lawn and flower beds that never saw a wilted petal. Inside, everything had its place. The polished floors gleamed, the furniture was always arranged just so, and our mother took great pride in decorating every holiday season as if our house was a showroom. I had a younger sister, Emily. She was the golden child, blonde, blue-eyed, and delicate in a way that made people instinctively want to protect her. My parents adored her. But back then, I never questioned it. She was sweet, after all. Always eager to please, always smiling, always the one in the spotlight. Our family dinners were a ritual. Every evening at 7 p.m. sharp, we gathered around our long oak dining table. Mom would serve elaborate meals, and Dad would ask about our day while sipping his whiskey. Emily would chatter excitedly about her ballet class, and I'd share my own stories from school. Looking back, I realize now how often my words were drowned out by theirs, how my voice never quite carried the same weight as hers. But at the time, it felt normal. Weekends were reserved for outings, picnics at the park, trips to the mall, Sunday brunch at our favorite cafe. My parents always made sure we presented the image of a perfect family. Smiling, happy, enviable. If you had asked me then, I would have said I had a good childhood. A great one, even. I had everything I needed, didn't I? A warm home, food on the table, parents who told us they loved us. I didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. Not yet. Saturdays in our household had a rhythm. Dad would wake up early to read the newspaper in the sunroom, sipping his black coffee while Mom bustled around the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The smell of fresh pancakes and scrambled eggs would fill the house, and by the time Emily and I made our way downstairs, the table was already set with neat stacks of food, fresh fruit, and glasses of orange juice. Emily always got to pick the first pancake. It was an unspoken rule. If she wanted the fluffiest, golden brown one right in the center, it was hers without question. I never really minded. It was just how things were. After breakfast, we'd pile into Dad's SUV and head into town. Sometimes we went to the farmer's market, where Mom would browse stalls of fresh produce and homemade candles while Emily and I wandered between the stands, clutching lemonades in plastic cups. Other times, we'd spend the afternoon at the country club pool, where Emily would show off her diving skills while I floated idly, enjoying the quiet of being unnoticed. Our parents weren't the kind to skimp on family experiences. Every summer, we took extravagant vacations, Hawaii, Paris, the Bahamas. My parents made sure we stayed in the best hotels, ate at the finest restaurants, and returned home with suitcases stuffed with souvenirs. Looking back, I see now that these trips were carefully curated. Pictures had to be taken at just the right angles, with everyone smiling, hair neatly brushed, and outfits coordinated. Even the casual moments weren't really casual. If I laughed too loudly or made a silly face in a photo, Mom would gently tell me to redo it. "Let's keep it nice," she'd say with a soft smile, tucking a strand of Emily's hair behind her ear. I loved those vacations, though. For a little while, everything felt perfect. We were just a family, enjoying life, making memories. I didn't dwell on the fact that Emily's excitement over picking out a new sundress would be met with enthusiastic nods, while my own choices barely earned a glance. I didn't question why, when we returned home, Emily's bedroom would be decorated with trinkets from our trip while mine stayed the same. I was content, or at least I thought I was. Because back then, I didn't know any better. The imbalance had always been there, lingering in the background. I just hadn't noticed it yet. Our house was the kind people slowed down to admire. It was large but not ostentatious, with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a pristine front lawn that Dad hired landscapers to maintain. Mom took great pride in the flower beds, changing them seasonally, tulips in the spring, marigolds in the fall. She made sure everything looked just right, as if our home itself was a reflection of our family's perfection. Inside, every room followed a strict aesthetic. The living room was decorated in soft creams and warm browns, with curated books stacked neatly on the coffee table, not for reading but for display. The dining room had a massive chandelier that gleamed above the polished oak table, and our kitchen looked like something out of a magazine: granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and cabinets that never held a single mismatched dish. Our bedrooms, though, were where the difference between Emily and me became the most obvious. Emily's room was a princess dream come to life. Mom repainted it every couple of years, always keeping up with whatever color Emily liked best at the time. First it was pastel pink, then lavender, then soft sky blue. Her bed had a plush, embroidered headboard, and she had twinkling fairy lights strung above it. A vanity sat in the corner, overflowing with expensive makeup and jewelry, even before she was old enough to wear most of it. Then there was my room. It wasn't small, nor was it neglected, but it was plain. It had been painted a neutral beige since I was 10, and even when I'd asked to change the color, my parents brushed it off. Beige is timeless, Mom had said. My bed was simple, just a regular frame, no fancy headboard, no fairy lights. My dresser was practical, nothing more. My walls were mostly bare, except for the few posters I bought myself. It wasn't as if my parents denied me things outright. If I needed new clothes, they bought them. If I wanted books, they let me pick a few. But that was the key difference. Emily got things simply because she wanted them, while I had to justify my requests. I never questioned it much. Some kids just had different personalities, right? Maybe I was just less demanding. Maybe I just didn't care as much about decorations or fancy gifts. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wondered. Like when I'd see Emily get a surprise shopping spree with Mom, returning home with bags of designer clothes she hadn't even asked for. Or when Dad took her out for a just-because dinner at a fancy steakhouse while I ate leftovers at home. Or when my birthday came around, and my celebrations always seemed just a little smaller, a little less significant than hers. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. Our family was happy. We had a beautiful home, we went on vacations, and my parents loved both of us. I told myself that over and over again. It wasn't until later that I realized how much I had been forcing myself to believe it. It started with little things. At first, I convinced myself that I was just imagining it. That the way my parents doted on Emily wasn't as one-sided as it seemed. That I was just being too sensitive. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, piece by piece. When Emily and I were younger, things had felt mostly equal. But as we got older, the gap widened, and I began to feel like I was fading into the background of my own family. Emily wasn't just the favorite, she was the priority. I remember one summer when I had worked for months on a school project, a regional science fair competition. I had stayed up late perfecting my display board, memorizing my presentation, pouring my heart into it. The night before, I reminded my parents what time I needed to be at the venue. They had nodded absent-mindedly, distracted by Emily, who was gushing about some dance recital she had coming up. The next morning, when I came downstairs dressed and ready, my parents were still in their robes, sipping coffee as if it were any other Saturday. "Aren't we leaving soon?" I asked, my heart sinking. Mom frowned slightly. "Oh, sweetie, I thought that was next weekend." "It's today," I said quietly. They exchanged a glance. "I don't know if we'll have time," Dad muttered. "Emily has her ballet practice, and we're supposed to pick up her new dress for the recital afterward." I felt something twist inside my chest. "But you said you'd come." "Well," Mom sighed, setting down her coffee cup, "can't you just ask a friend's parents to take you?" I stood there for a moment, gripping the strap of my bag. I had been so excited for this, had imagined them sitting in the audience, proud of me, maybe even taking pictures. But Emily needed a dress. So I took the bus. By the time I got home, exhausted but clutching my second-place ribbon, my parents barely looked up from where they were helping Emily pick out accessories to match her recital costume. "How was it, dear?" Mom asked, not even glancing away from the necklace Emily was holding up. I swallowed hard. It was fine. They never even asked if I won. There were 100 moments like that, each one small on its own, but together, they painted an unmistakable picture. Emily's achievements, no matter how minor, were celebrated, broadcasted, cherished. Mine? An afterthought. Emily struggled with math, so they hired a private tutor without hesitation. I wanted to take an advanced literature course, but they told me it was too expensive and unnecessary. When Emily wanted a new phone, she got it immediately. When mine broke, I had to wait 6 months until my birthday. When Emily got sick, Mom and Dad fussed over her endlessly. But the time I had a fever so high that I nearly passed out at school, they told me to tough it out until the nurse called them to pick me up. I tried so hard to ignore it, to pretend it didn't bother me. But resentment is like water wearing away at stone. It doesn't break you all at once. It happens slowly over years until one day, you realize there's nothing left but cracks. And those cracks were about to split wide open. Birthdays in our house were always a big deal, at least for Emily. Every year, Mom and Dad went all out. Themed parties, extravagant gifts, and a guest list that included all of her friends, plus their parents, because Mom loved the spectacle of hosting. The living room would be decorated with pastel-colored banners, the dining table filled with a professionally made cake, and enough food to feed an army. For my birthdays, things were quieter. A cake from the grocery store, a small family dinner, maybe a couple of presents. "You've never been one for big parties," Mom would say, as if I had made that choice for myself. But Emily's 18th birthday was something else entirely. They started planning months in advance. Dad rented a banquet hall, Mom worked with a decorator, and Emily got to pick out a designer dress for the event. The invitations were embossed with gold lettering, and a professional photographer was hired to document every moment. I knew my parents would give her something extravagant, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment I saw the brand new car sitting in our driveway that evening, a sleek, shiny white Lexus, complete with a giant red bow on top. Emily squealed in delight, covering her mouth with both hands before rushing forward to hug our parents. "Oh my God! You guys are the best!" Mom and Dad beamed with pride, basking in the attention as our family and guests applauded. I stood there, watching as Emily got into the driver's seat, already snapping pictures for social media. My chest felt tight, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Then Mom turned to me with a bright smile and handed me a small envelope. "For you, sweetheart." I opened it, heart hammering in my chest. Inside were 2 crisp $100 bills. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "What's this?" Dad patted my shoulder. "A little something for you, too. We didn't forget about you." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for them to laugh and pull out something else, something that would at least resemble fairness. But they just smiled as if they'd done something thoughtful, as if they hadn't just handed me pocket change while giving Emily a luxury car. I felt the heat rise in my face, my breath shaky. "Are you serious?" Mom's smile faltered. "What do you mean, honey?" I glanced at Emily, who was still admiring her reflection in the driver's side mirror. "She gets a car. I get $200. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples as if I were the one being difficult. "Emily needs a car for college. We've always planned on getting her one." I let out a hollow laugh. "And I don't? I work, I take the bus, You don't need a car right now," Mom interrupted, a gentle but firm warning in her tone. "You don't even go out much." The words hit me like a slap. You don't go out. It was always the same thing. My wants were unnecessary. My needs, forgettable. My existence, secondary. I looked at the money in my hand. $200. A meaningless gesture. An afterthought. Emily finally turned toward me, flipping her hair over her shoulder with a smirk. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a car. Just a car." I clenched my teeth, shoving the money back into the envelope. Yeah, just a car. But something inside me shifted in that moment. The resentment I had swallowed for years hardened into something sharper, something unmovable. This wasn't just about a birthday. It was about everything. And they were going to regret it. The party stretched on into the night, but I wasn't really there anymore. I was sitting in the middle of it all, invisible as always, my fingers still clutching that ridiculous envelope as if holding it any tighter would make it feel like something more. $200. That was what I was worth to them. That was what my parents thought would be enough while they paraded Emily's brand new Lexus in front of me, glowing with pride as if they had given her the keys to the world. I could still hear her voice, light and careless, tossing out her thanks between bursts of laughter, already bragging about the road trips she'd take and how much fun she'd have with her friends. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she think about what it might feel like for me to sit there, watching. But why would she? She had never needed to. She had never had to wonder if she was loved, if she mattered. She had never had to fight to be noticed, to be given something without begging for it first. Everything was handed to her before she could even think to ask. She had always been their golden girl, and I had always been the extra. The afterthought. I told myself to let it go, to swallow it down like I had every other time. But this time, it didn't work. This time, the bitterness sat too heavy in my chest, clawing at my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I didn't just feel hurt. I felt something darker, something I had never let myself fully acknowledge before. I felt rage. It burned low and steady, curling around my bones, a quiet, dangerous thing that had been growing for years without me realizing it. They had spent my entire life making me small. Every time they overlooked me, every time they dismissed my achievements, every time they made it clear that Emily was the daughter who truly mattered, they had chipped away at me, little by little. But tonight, something shifted. I wasn't small anymore. I wasn't going to sit there and take it. Not this time. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to wait for them to see me. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of attention or pretend that being pushed aside didn't bother me. I was done being quiet. Done being the girl who let things go. They had taken everything from me. It was time I took something back. The days after Emily's birthday felt different. Everything in the house carried on as usual. Mom fussed over dinner plans. Dad left early for work and came home late. Emily floated through the house with her usual air of effortless privilege, but I wasn't the same. Something inside me had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could ever go back. I moved through my days like a ghost, detached, watching my family from a distance as if I were an outsider peering through a window. I barely spoke at meals, barely reacted when Emily gushed about her car and the weekend trips she had already planned. My parents didn't notice the change in me. They never really noticed me at all. But I noticed them. I noticed the way Mom would leave her purse open on the kitchen counter, her credit cards poking out from her overstuffed wallet. I noticed how Dad barely glanced at his bank statements when they arrived in the mail, too busy reading the business section of the newspaper. I noticed how Emily tossed her keys onto the hallway table without a second thought, never once considering that they might not be there when she came back for them. I noticed everything now. The resentment that had been festering inside me for years had sharpened into something cold and focused. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was determination. A quiet, steady certainty that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being the forgotten daughter, the one who was expected to accept less and be grateful for it. I had spent years convincing myself that things would change, that one day my parents would look at me and see someone worth loving as much as Emily. But that day would never come. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I achieved, I would never be their golden child. I would never be the one they looked at with unshakable pride. I would always be the one who got the leftovers, the one who had to fight for every bit of recognition. I wasn't fighting anymore. Let them have their perfect family. Let them pour all their love and money and attention into Emily. Let them continue living in their carefully constructed world where I didn't matter. Because soon, I would be gone. And when I left, I wouldn't just walk away. I would make sure they felt it. They had spent years taking me for granted. It was time for them to understand what it meant to lose something. It was time for them to know what it felt like to be left with nothing. The night I left, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that only existed when my parents were deep in sleep, when Emily had long since retired to her perfectly decorated bedroom, wrapped in expensive silk sheets that had probably cost more than anything I had ever owned. I moved carefully, every step practiced, every motion deliberate. This wasn't something I had rushed into. I had planned it down to the last detail, ensuring there would be no mistakes, no second chances for them to stop me. I had started by taking little things, small amounts of cash here and there, just enough that my parents wouldn't notice. Dad's wallet, always left on the entryway table after work, had been an easy target. Mom's emergency stash in the kitchen drawer? Even easier. I never took too much at once. Just enough for them to assume they had miscounted or spent more than they remembered. Then, when I was sure no one was paying attention, I transferred money from their accounts. Small amounts, carefully spaced out. Just enough to slip under their radar. Emily had always been careless with her laptop, leaving it open with her banking apps logged in, assuming no one would ever touch them. She should have known better. By the time I was ready to leave, I had more than enough. Not just to escape, but to start fresh. To build a life for myself, one that didn't revolve around being an afterthought. But I wasn't just going to walk away. That wasn't enough. Emily's car sat in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light. The Lexus. The symbol of everything my parents had ever done to remind me of my place in this family. It wasn't just a car. It was a declaration, proof that Emily would always be the one who got more, the one who mattered. Not tonight. I grabbed the keys from the hallway table, right where she always left them, too confident to think someone might take what was hers. The weight of them in my palm felt final, like a door closing behind me. I didn't hesitate. I walked out, opened the car door, and slid into the driver's seat. It smelled new, expensive, like leather and privilege. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. For a brief second, I thought about what my parents would say when they realized what I had done. The shock, the anger, the betrayal. But they had never cared about my feelings. So why should I care about theirs? I started the engine. The soft hum of it sent a thrill through me. I was really doing this. I was leaving, and they couldn't stop me. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I was in control. And I wasn't coming back. The city lights stretched out before me, a glittering sea of possibility. I had no final destination, no carefully mapped-out plan beyond getting as far away from them as I could. But for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. The unknown didn't feel like something to be afraid of, it felt like freedom. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, the world quiet except for the steady hum of the engine beneath my hands. Emily's car, my car now, moved smoothly, effortlessly. I had never driven something this new before. My old beater, the one I had barely managed to keep running through high school, had rattled and coughed every time I pushed it past 40. But this? This was power. This was control. This was everything they had told me I wasn't allowed to have. I had checked my phone once before I left. No missed calls. No frantic texts from my parents, no sudden realization from them that I was gone. Of course not. It was late, and they had no reason to think I wouldn't be exactly where they left me, forgotten in my room, invisible as always. They wouldn't realize what had happened until the morning. Until Emily woke up and found her precious car missing. Until my parents noticed the drained accounts, the missing cash, the fact that I wasn't there to be ignored anymore. I wondered how long it would take for the panic to set in. Would they call the police? Would they assume I had been kidnapped? Would they even be able to comprehend that I had done this on purpose? It didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I had spent years living in that house, breathing the same stale air of their disappointment. Years watching them celebrate Emily's existence while treating me like I was just there, something to be tolerated, an accessory to their perfect family image. I had waited and waited for them to see me, to acknowledge me, to love me the way they loved her. I wasn't waiting anymore. I drove for hours, the city lights eventually fading in my rearview mirror as I pushed further and further away from the life I was leaving behind. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I wanted distance, miles between me and the house where I had spent years being treated like I was nothing. I kept expecting the weight of what I had done to settle in, to make me feel guilty, anxious, afraid. But all I felt was relief. A lightness in my chest that I had never known before. Somewhere along the highway, I pulled into a gas station, parking in the farthest corner of the lot. The adrenaline from the night had kept me going, but now exhaustion was creeping in, my limbs heavy, my mind buzzing with everything I had just done. I leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the roof of the car that wasn't mine, but at the same time was. I thought about Emily waking up in the morning, reaching for her car keys in their usual spot, only to find them missing. I imagined the slow realization spreading across her face, the way her voice would rise in a panicked shriek as she ran to check the driveway. I pictured my parents still groggy from sleep, confused at first, then horrified when they understood what had happened. And then they'd realize the money was gone too. Would they call the police? Probably not. That would mean admitting to the world that their perfect daughter had stolen from them. No, they'd try to keep it quiet, to control the situation like they always did. Maybe they'd tell their friends that Emily's car was in the shop, that there had been a banking error. They'd try to explain it away, because admitting the truth, that their daughter had chosen to leave them behind, was something they wouldn't be able to stomach. I smiled to myself, the first real smile I had felt in years. They had spent their entire lives ignoring me. Now, they would feel my absence like a wound they couldn't ignore. The thought filled me with a quiet satisfaction. I had spent my whole life waiting for them to notice me, to care, to see me as more than just the girl standing in the background of their perfect little world. Now, for the first time, they were going to feel what it was like when I was truly gone. The gas station was quiet, the neon lights flickering above me as I reached into the envelope I had stuffed into my jacket pocket. The bills were crisped between my fingers, the stolen money that would fund my new life. A life that belonged to me, not them. For the first time, I wasn't just running away. I was running toward something. And I wasn't looking back. The first few days passed in a blur. I had no real plan, only the certainty that I was never going back. I drove through unfamiliar towns, stopping only when I needed gas or food, paying in cash to leave no trail behind. It was exhilarating in a way I had never known, waking up in a cheap motel, knowing no one knew where I was, knowing that I was completely free. At first, I kept expecting my phone to ring, for my parents to call in a panic, demanding that I come home. But the silence stretched on. They weren't looking for me. They were dealing with the mess I had left behind. Emily must have woken up and screamed when she saw her car missing. Mom and Dad must have scrambled to check their bank accounts, realizing too late that the money was gone. But they wouldn't go to the police. No, that would mean admitting that their invisible daughter had finally done something impossible to ignore. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself their silence didn't bother me. But late at night, as I lay in motel beds staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. Were they angry? Were they ashamed? Or, worst of all, did they just see this as another inconvenience, another problem to sweep under the rug like they always had? It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for them. By the end of the first week, I had found a place to settle, an apartment in a quiet city a few hours away. It wasn't much, just a tiny studio with peeling wallpaper and a creaky floor, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish in the kitchen, every decision about how to decorate, it was all mine. No one telling me what I could or couldn't have, no one deciding for me. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I was in control. I got a job at a local cafe, just something simple to start. The work was easy, the people friendly. No one here knew who I was, where I had come from, or what I had done. They just saw me as another person, another girl trying to make a life for herself. And for the first time, that was enough. One night, as I sat on my tiny balcony with a cheap bottle of wine, I checked my phone for the first time since leaving. My hands hesitated over the screen, wondering if I should look, if I even wanted to know. But when I opened my messages, I saw nothing. No missed calls. No texts. Not from my parents. Not from Emily. Not from anyone. A part of me had expected it, but seeing it still felt like a cold confirmation. They weren't looking for me. They weren't trying to bring me back. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and turned off my phone. Good. They had made their choice. And so had I. Weeks turned into months, and for the first time in my life, I felt alive. There was no pressure to be anyone other than myself, no expectations to meet, No comparisons to Emily hanging over my head like a shadow I could never outrun. Every morning, I woke up in my apartment, drank coffee from my mug, and went to a job that I had chosen for myself. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And that was enough. I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. My parents had made their choice long before I ever left. They had chosen to see me as less, as the child they could push aside in favor of their perfect daughter. I had spent years waiting for them to change, for them to wake up and see me. But the truth was, they never would. And I wasn't wasting another second waiting for something that would never happen. The money I had taken was more than enough to keep me stable for a while, but I didn't touch most of it. I worked hard, saved every dollar, planned for something bigger. This wasn't just running away. This was building something new. Something better. I had escaped, but now it was time to grow. One evening, I passed by a bookstore and saw a help wanted sign in the window. It wasn't something I had ever pictured for myself before, but something about it felt right. I walked in, introduced myself, and a week later, I was working there part-time alongside the cafe. I spent my days surrounded by quiet, by the smell of old paper and fresh coffee, by people who didn't know my past and never asked questions. No one saw me as an afterthought. No one ignored me. I belonged here. One night, I sat on my balcony, staring out at the city lights, and realized something startling. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had driven me out of that house, the bitterness that had fueled my every step, it was gone. It had burned bright and hot, but now, there was nothing left to feed it. And in its place, there was peace. I would never forget what they had done to me. The years of neglect, of being pushed aside, of being made to feel like I was less than my sister, that would always be a part of me. But it wasn't who I was. Not anymore. I took out my phone one last time, scrolled through my contacts, and hovered over the names that had once ruled my life. Mom, Dad, Emily. 3 names that had defined me, shaped me, made me feel small. I deleted them all. And just like that, I was free. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had built this life with my own hands, and whatever came next, it was mine. And that was all I ever needed.